Hi there and welcome back to the studio. Welcome to this very special little video here just for you on Patreon. I think it's time we had a bit of a chat, you and I. I want to talk to you about composition specifically here in this video. And this is going to be a bit of a loose, bit of an informal video, but I want to share just some ideas and some of the things that I'm thinking about at the moment and give you a couple of tricks that might immediately improve your compositions if you use them. And so there's going to be a few different areas that we're going to explore in this particular video. So here's where we're going to go, right? We're going to spend a little bit of time together, and I've got a lot of stuff to talk to you about. But I think by the time we're done talking here, this morning or this evening, wherever you are in the world, by the time we're done here with this composition session, hopefully I'm going to give you some takeaways that are going to improve your work immediately. I hope. That's the aim anyway. If not, well, hopefully you find this entertaining. Regardless, you know what? Thanks for being here. I appreciate your support. Thanks so much for being a patron over on Patreon. I could not do this without you. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? Well, I've been thinking for years, nearly 20 years, about composition and just looking for the edge, just looking for a better way to tell a story, looking for something that's more visually pleasing, more visually harmonious, just looking for the edge always, and constantly asking myself, how did the old masters do this? You know, they almost made it look so easy. And when we see the consistency in the old masters' work, you know, it can be a little bit deflating, but I try to keep inspired by just going, no, there's a reason that they're this good. And it comes down to consistency and a consistent methodology and application of some tried and true practices. So I want to share with you a few of my artist heroes in terms of composition and how they use composition. And we're going to go into a little bit of history here with one in particular. And then I want to talk to you about some recent seascape color studies that I've done and how I'm going to take those compositions and manipulate them using the golden ratio to immediately improve the visual arrangement. And then finally, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into a Photoshop painting or drawing, which is going to be of a sunset scene. Now, you would have seen this on the Tish Zone, on that private Facebook page that's associated with this Patreon. You would have seen me upload that picture there. Thank you so much for all of your kind comments. It seems that a few people are looking forward to me painting that one, so that's going to be coming your way very soon. But what I want to share with you here is a bit of that process as a time lapse of where I started with that compositional design and then where it ended up digitally. And that's ultimately what I'm going to be uploading or transferring to the canvas. So that's going to be good fun. So this video is going to have a little bit of everything. It's going to be, as I said, a bit looser than my normal videos, but I just got to share this with you. I can finally talk. And now I'm just going to let loose. If you don't know what I'm talking about, recently I had some dental stuff done and I had a tooth removed and okay, I'll spare you the gory details, but talking rattled my head and it was very weird, but I'm back to normal now. So things seem to be on the up and up. So now I've got my mic, I've got my Wacom tablet, I've got my keyboard here, I've got the camera, you're here. Let's do this. I'm ready. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over onto this camera and let's talk about composition. Here we go. Okay, first thing I want to do is I want to talk to you about this painting here. Now, some of you might recognize this. Some of you may never have seen this painting before. This is actually one of my favorite paintings of all time. It's just stunning. So this is Droving into the Light by Hans Huyssen. And it's one of Australia's finest landscape paintings that's ever been produced in that country. As far as I know I'm making a huge claim there, but come on, it's Hans Huyssen. You know, Australia produced some incredible artists like Arthur Streeton, Frederick McCubbin, Tom Roberts, Sidney Long. The list goes on. And those are some of my favorites. But here, and George Lambert, let's not forget George Lambert. Here, Hans Huyssen was just amazing for his landscapes, his outback Australian landscapes, his epic paintings of red river gums, which is the case here, and this kind of rural lifestyle. which he was famous for. And this has got to be one of his finest paintings ever. And it's hanging, the original is hanging at the Art Gallery of Western Australia, where I took this photograph of the original and just standing in front of it. It's just amazing. So what are some of the things I like about this painting? Well, I just love the way it's painted. I mean, it's incredible. It's got such a beautiful painterly quality to it. And even though this was just shot on my iPhone, we can kind of make out some of the details. It's got a really nice texture to it. Look at the brushwork. When you get up close, you can really appreciate the structure and the form in his brushwork. And look how effortless it looks. Don't you just hate that? I hate that, but it's kind of cool, of course, as well. Like, when I say I hate, I mean, he makes it look so easy. He's just slapped that paint. Look at that brushstroke right there. Just bam, he just slaps the paint onto the surface. But when we look at it as a whole, it just makes total sense. There's nothing out of place. Okay, what I want to do is I want to give you the backstory to this painting, because the date on this painting might surprise you. So I'm going to flick here to this book, Hans Huyssen, which is a publication put out by the Art Gallery of South Australia. And we'll flick right to it here. And let me give you a little bit of the backstory here, because one of the things that I love about this painting is the composition. But it doesn't seem to be that straightforward when we read the history. Okay, must be coming up on it now. Here we go. Okay, Droving into the Light, 1914 to 1921. Stop right there. What? Look at the quality of the brushstrokes, okay? Are you telling me, now if I get my math correct, okay, are you meaning to tell me that this dude took 7 years to paint this painting? Look at it. It looks like it's been slapped together with a house brush. I mean, come on. I mean, it's beautifully well painted, but he's not messing around. So what took him so long? Why was it here for so long? Well, let's get into it here. Although this large painting ostensibly deals with the droving of sheep, it chiefly celebrates the magnificence of Australian eucalyptus trees. Nevertheless, the combination of a nationalistic gum tree motif with a theme of end of day homecoming is symbolic of a new age. The unified Commonwealth of Australia had been created and was still in the process of formation. Droving into the Light is one of Australia's greatest Federation pictures. Huyssen here presents his finest display of visual choreography, directing us through a triumphal gateway of monumental gums to a sunbathed, verdant landscape beyond. Its disarming harmony is based on a complex play of dynamic compositional elements which rescue it from potential banality. Hans Huyssen sweeps the viewer into the scene by positioning the dawdling sheep and sheepdog in the middle foreground. There we are. From there, eyes are led across the dirt road to a small but significant highlight, the viewer's eye anti-clockwise up the trunk and across the overhanging gum tips and down the trunk of a more distant inclined tree on the left. And once more into the foreground, where the impetus of the lone driver emerging from the shadows on the right returns the viewer deep into the vortex of light. Originally titled Into the Light, it is Hans Huyssen's most successful use of light in all his eucalypt paintings in oil. The apparent naturalness disguises the extent of Huyssen's reworkings. Here we go. The bravura composition rests upon the red river gum center right, in particular on the delightful tension created by the small space that is between its overhanging gum tips and the trunk of the large tree, foreground left. So they're talking right here about this gum tree center right and this one here over to the left. The river red gum was in fact an afterthought. Huyssen recalled it in 1954 that introduced a remedy to a compositional disharmony. Huyssen recalled in 1954 that it was introduced to remedy a compositional disharmony. And this is lifted from one of Hans Huyssen's journals. I realized the weakness of the composition and repainted portions, introducing the large central red gum. This helped to bind the two sides and made a great improvement, materially enhancing the whole conception. Now, I'd been looking at this painting for years and years without having much of an idea of the backstory. And some years ago, I decided I'd actually read bits of this book, because I'm often just looking at the pictures, right? You know, come on, you're the same, right? Don't give me that. You're exactly the same. You'd be looking at the pictures and not reading. Now, when I actually read this, it blew my mind, because I realized that Huyson, along with other artists, but Huyson here in this particular example was struggling with one thing: composition. So he exhibits the painting, it falls flat, it doesn't do very much for him at all. He brings it back into the studio, he fixes the composition, and it goes on to be one of Australia's finest paintings and recognized as one of Australia's just federation paintings, upheld as just an amazing example of what Australia could produce artistically. And it's one of my favorite paintings of all time. And the original, oh, good night. It is unreal. So I was playing with this a little bit, and I was thinking, what would this look like if we actually just took out that red river gum? How would it have looked when he exhibited it? Something like that. Right? Now, I've taken some liberties here with this painting, and I have reworked this in Photoshop. Now, of course, it's missing some of his beautiful brushwork, but generally speaking, this may have been what we were dealing with prior to the introduction of that central red river gum. Now, I am making a little bit of an assumption here, but just trying to illustrate a point. Think about this image here on the screen in terms of composition and what it does for you, okay? And then back to the way it is as we know and love it. That is such a huge difference right there between those two. Now, I'm going on and on in the critique videos about some mistakes that can be made in composition. One of those things is goalposts. I've never seen a better example of goalposts than this painting. Now, granted, it's pretty cool in terms of a painting. I mean, look, the foreground's working. There's got all sorts of great stuff going on, but you would just walk on by and not really give this much thought. But that gum right there, the introduction of the darker tone, the contrast, where it protects the viewer and channels us and funnels us into that light, as the text here says. My goodness, it's amazing. And the one thing here that was changed was composition. This is a compositional consideration. So if it could have made such a difference here with this painting and Australian art history, hopefully that makes the point that we need to be paying really close attention to our composition. All right, I want to just talk about a couple more Hans Huyson's paintings, because I got a bit of a theory here. Okay, this painting here is hanging at the art gallery in Ballarat in Victoria, and it's called Three Gums, and it's by Hans Huyson, and this was painted between 1915 and 1920. Right? And I didn't have the presence of mind to photograph, but I could just make out 1915 to 1920 in that label. I don't know if maybe I'm just imagining things, but this was painted at the same time that Droving Into the Light was painted. And I'm wondering, was this painting that's Three Gums, it's obviously had all of them in the one painting, was this painting the aha light bulb moment for Hans Huyson, which caused him to go back and go, you know what this painting needs? It needs that river gum right there in the center. Just an idea. Not sure. But again, let's just appreciate his brushwork. Isn't that something? Just absolutely epic. It's a beautiful painting, and Hans Huyson did some extraordinary work. Now let's talk about Karl Runges. He's a German-born American artist. I think he died back in the 40s or the 50s. There's Briar in the background. Don't mind her. You okay, darling? Keep it down. I'm talking about composition here. Good girl. Now, he did some amazing wildlife paintings and scenery of Canada, United States, Alaska, beautiful stuff. Really specialized in wildlife. But one of the things that Runges did was he meticulously planned his compositions. He went right from the beginning, getting absorbed in nature, studying it from life, painting on plein air, working things up into sketches, smaller oil studies, and then finally ending up with the bigger piece. So I have this book, and I took this photograph straight out of the book. It's from the Glenbow Archives, and it's called Carl Runges, Artist and Sportsman. And here is one of the pages from that book that talks about this painting here, Hunting the Canada Moose. Okay, let's look at this in terms of composition first before we go to the studies. What this painting does for me, particularly in terms of composition, is that use of empty void space and creating tension, visual tension within a piece, and creating some sort of flow that helps the narrative. Now we're seeing things here from the moose's perspective. He's just lifted his head up. He's having a drink out of the river, and he just sees these hunters coming around the bend and is almost alerted. Those ears are forward, and we get a sense of the story. But I think really what helps this story is where things are placed within the composition. Notice the horizon line. It's pretty high up in the composition, kind of around that top third mark, thereabouts. Could even be golden ratio mark. Here we're pretty close to the eye line of that moose, and that puts us in context with this moose, so we're seeing it from his perspective, very much so. Here are some of the studies that Carl Runges has done to inform that larger painting, and these are studies from life, some of them plein air, and you could just see the level of detail that he's going to with this particular painting. It's incredible. Now, how many of us as artists, really, honestly now, how many of us here actually do this for a painting? Okay, I'm trying to do it more and more because the proof's in the pudding, it works. And one of the things I love about the artists I want to talk to you about here, they produced a consistency. At least that's the impression that I get from looking at a body of work. You see into their mind. Here we can see his thought process of what went into creating something that works. Now let's talk about another example here. Here we have a study, a preliminary study for late fall on the clear water, and then we can see where he's dropped a moose into that composition. Have a look at that little study in the bottom right there. And notice here, look, we'll go ahead and zoom in on that for you. It doesn't feel complete. And I think that the reason for that is that he had left that void space thinking about where he was going to put that moose. I would even hazard a guess is that he might have had a prop or something, maybe a cutout in the studio that he could have put up there. Maybe, I don't know. It's just a thought. But then you look at the final painting and it just completes the picture, doesn't it? So again, Carl Runges, like Hans Huyssen, they're thinking about composition, and their paintings are the result of planning. Here's another one. These pronghorn antelopes spring on the range. Love pronghorns, one of my favorite North American animals. But look at the flow that's been created in this painting. Get a load of this. Now we have these animals descending the slope, coming down the right slope of the composition. Then you've got this big bull coming towards us. And then there's this visual cyclic tension that's created with that blooming bush there that kicks us back up to the right and then back around again. You would have heard me in the critique videos talk about cyclic vectors. Here's an example of a cyclic vector being used by Carl Runges. But again, look at the use of void space here and how he's arranged this. But then what's this down here? Look at that study. It's just a simple little sketch, but this could have given him everything that he needed to inform the bigger painting, and I just love it. And when I saw this, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start studying. I'm going to do some studies too. I don't do enough of them, but I'm going now. I'm doing it now. All right? What have you done today? Anyway, look, we got preliminary studies for Lake MacArthur, and he's done a whole bunch of these, and we could see little things shifting, even though at first glance it's like, hang on, these two are the same over here on the right hand side, and over here on the left, those two are the same. Well, hang on a second. Look at the foreground composition here. Look at the bottom right of that painting there with those rocks embedded over on the right-hand side and how it opens up the water on the left. Conversely, up here on the study, on the top study here, everything's over on the left-hand side, opening up the water on the right. Look here at the proximity of that mountain line to the top of the canvas, and then down here even closer. So you can see he's thinking about this constantly. What's going to make a better big painting? And again, more studies that informed this painting. Carl Runges is a master. He's got to be on your radar, so I'd highly recommend getting a file, saving a bunch of images from the internet if you can buy one of his books. Some of them can be a bit pricey, but I think it's worth it because it gives you things like this. And again, come on, check this out. Look at these beautiful little studies. Look at the quality of this guy's brushwork. I mean, it's a lot like Edgar Payne, but there's also a texture. There's an impasto quality to it. It's just slapped on there. But then you get back from it and you have a look. Oh my goodness, just amazing. And I love the structure that's in those marks. But then look over here on the right-hand side at those studies that informed this larger work. There's something about this now. Studying our compositions is important. I say often with my paintings that, we all have 20/20 vision and hindsight. So why not paint with that hindsight? There's nothing worse than spending all these hours in the studio and missing the opportunity, missing the mark, and going, man, now that I finished with that painting, I should have moved that tree. I should have put a red river gum right in the center right of the composition. That would have really fixed things up. But if we've already been there with extensive studies and just drilling it, and doing pencil and paintings and working this out. And as you'll see here, digital helps. We got the tools here. Why don't we use them? By doing this, I think it ends up, we make better paintings. Now, there is a danger that we could get into this analysis paralysis and not actually move on an idea. But even still, I think it's really important that we do what we can with studying these compositions. And I think it ends up with better work. I don't know. What you think? Let me know in those comments down below. Now let's have a chat about Edgar Payne. And you would have heard in a past critique video, I've talked about Edgar Payne a bunch. I just hold him in such high regard in terms of his brushwork, his use of composition, all kinds of things. Lots to love about him. Highly recommend the book, A Scenic Journey. I think that's it. Edgar Payne, A Scenic Journey. There's a few people in the Tisch Zone actually that have got that book now following that recommendation. So I'm sure you're enjoying it. But it is, of all the books on my bookshelf, it is up there with my favorites. Now, I had a little bit of a freak out when I saw this page in that book. And this is referring to one of Edgar Payne's, I guess one of his, a bit of teaching here when he was teaching either a workshop or a class or when he was putting together a book way back when. I don't know the name. Here we go. I should just read it, right? Here we go. Arrangements of Picture Design, European Artists, Original Layout for Composition of Outdoor Painting. There you go. Actually, my buddy Sam has got that book. We're going to talk about that in a second. What are we looking at here? These are little studies that Edgar Payne made of artists that he thought were noteworthy. Brangwyn, I haven't talked about him much. He's come up as a hero, I think, once or twice in a critique. We've got Courbet here, okay, beautiful landscape. Constable, circle, or a Steelyard. So what he's doing here, when you see circle or pattern here for Brangwyn, top left, or center on the top, diagonal line, or here, circle or a steelyard, right? We'll talk about what a steelyard is. What he's talking about is a compositional form. Let's not get too carried away with the form just yet. We'll talk a bit more about this, but what I wanted to show was specifically this example and something that I thought was really, really cool. Manet, Steelyard, Brangwyn, Group, Mass. Beautiful. Any name there ring a bell? Any name at all? Come on, let me know. Who is this? Right here. Hans Huyssen, Circle or Tunnel. How cool is that? How cool is it that Hans Huyssen is on Edgar Payne's radar? That's so cool. when two of you heroes just kind of connect, I just think that's amazing. That's awesome. Now, he's referring to Hans Huyssen here with the tunnel or the circle composition for this particular painting. And I'll see if I can find a way to just cut it in here at this point in the video. This is a photograph taken from a book that I have. Love this painting. Great use of contrast, great use of light against dark, dark against light, warm versus cool. And the flow in the composition is beautiful from these sheep in the foreground, the way they circle into the scene, leading the eye up through those trees and then back around again in a very cyclic fashion, hence the circle or tunnel. So these are compositional forms that, and examples of artists that, again, that Edgar Payne thought were noteworthy that he was mentioning in his book, The Composition of Outdoor Painting. Now, let's carry on a little bit and talk about some more things from the same publication by Edgar Payne. Now here, he's talking about, with little sketches, different compositional forms again, but different things you can do with masses and group massing within a scene. These are really valuable to do just as little studies before you jump into any painting. It's one of the things I try to do before I do any painting. It's a series of little thumbnails. If it's digital, okay, great. For the most part, though, I try to do it in pencil first. I'm still the traditional guy. And here a little bit of a discussion on perspective. Now, again, this comes from The Composition of Outdoor Painting. Brilliant book. I've got to get that book. I thought the only way that I'd get my hands on it in New Zealand was to steal it off my buddy Samuel Earp. But wasn't so lucky. He was looking the whole time. Anyway, here we've got, again, from Edgar Payne's book, and these I lifted straight off the internet, different compositional forms that he considers, again, noteworthy. I don't get too carried away in terms of something's a steel yard, balance scale, circle, compound curve. I don't really fixate on the form, and I'll explain why here in a little bit. But it is interesting because most art books that you find that you'll open up will give you the S, the O, the diagonal, the L, the steel yard, the balance scales, something like that. But it is interesting. Look, it can work. It's a great as an analogy, I suppose, for working out a system to kind of think about your painting. But I think there might be another way to go around this. I've been employing something different. It's not to make Edgar Payne wrong. The guy's a genius, all right? I would never do that. Here's some more forms. Pyramid or triangle. The cross. Again, not seeing a huge difference between that and a steel yard per se, but radiating line. There's another compositional form right there. We'll zoom in on that sucker. L or rectangle. Right? This is a bit of a dangerous compositional form. I've never had much success using that per se because it leaves so much void, empty space. I tend to fill that space with something. So it ends up becoming a combination of L and radiating line. But there you go. Interesting stuff. The suspended steel yard. Ooh, getting fancy, okay? So you've got your major forms about that lever there. You got your little pivot point. You've got these major forms dangling down here. So where's he use this? Well, reflecting in water. Check that out. Some reflections of a tree there on top. Reflections of some boats. I'm breezing through here because I want to get to the good bit, okay? 3-spot. Not seeing a huge difference between that and a triangular composition, but still, it's interesting. Group mass. Again, interesting, but what's the difference between that and an L? You get what I'm saying? Let me just say it's me, and maybe I need to do a bit more of a study on this, but I think there's something here that we can do that will work that might just get this out of the way. And we'll talk about that in a bit. More pages from the book first. Okay, the tunnel. Well, we've already talked about that and the O, but there's some really cool examples. In fact, that might even be a Bierstadt example. I think I've seen an Albert Bierstadt painting that looks a lot like that one in the center. A nice grove of trees there. The diagonal, some beautiful mountains. Again, that Corot kind of esque diagonal scene of the hill. The silhouette, very interesting compositional device. That tone, light against dark, dark against light. And pattern. Again, I try to stay away from pattern. I use pattern repetition, but it's a way to strengthen the composition, but it's not it for the entirety of the scene because it ends up looking too patchy and there's nowhere really to go. I like creating a bit more of a story. I'm weird like that. So there are these pages again from the book, and you can find these if you just do a Google on the composition of outdoor painting. Maybe that would be of something that's of use. I like kind of referring to them because it's just interesting. It gives you something to think about. But as I said, there's something else that I think works really well as a system, and we don't have to fixate on this because these shapes will come up just inadvertently as we explore our subject matter. Now, another name I want to put on your radar here is Ted Kautsky. Now, Ted Kautsky, from a composition point of view, he just demystified so much stuff for me. Now, he was really prominent in the early 1900s. He died, I think, as well, like Rungus. I think it was the 1950s he died. He died really untimely death is the way his books read. But he was a master of watercolor, and he was a master draftsman as well. And he had a way of just creating some killer compositions. So here, through these examples, 1 through 6, we can see some different examples of the way Ted Kautsky approaches composition. And these will be some things that you've probably heard before, like avoiding the dead center. So here, look at number 1 here on the left. And notice that silo attached to the barn is dead center, and the road lines right up with it, and then you've got those trees equidistant either side. Now cast your memory back to the Hans Huyssen painting, and remember the goalposts that were formed by those 2 trees. You got to have that other tree in there. Isn't it interesting here in number 2 what Kautsky has done by the introduction of that 3rd tree, getting the silo and the barn off to the left in the scene, and then balancing it out with these 2 foreground trees. Now suddenly we have something harmonious, something with a nice flow to it, something that gives a bit of direction. Number 1 is dead. All right, look, you could probably pull it off if you painted everything really, really well, but at the end of the day, so what? Who cares? Having a beautiful composition where these visual elements hang off that composition, that's where it's at. And sometimes just moving stuff out of the center can be enough. And Kautsky's illustrating that for us here. Here's another example, and this is why I shy away from the L-shaped composition. Look at number 3. How we've got a heavy dark mass over on the left-hand side. It's completely void and open, this easy breezy space over on the right, but your attention just kind of flows off the scene and it's carried by the direction of that river. So you'll hear me talk about exiting vectors through critique videos. You might have heard me mention that in the past. I'm going to mention it a bunch more in upcoming critiques. What we create within a scene are lines of force or lines of sight. Our eye travels along edges. And anytime our eye picks up an edge and starts to flow towards a convergence of vectors, so the edge of the canvas is an edge, and then we also have edges within the painting. Anytime we flow along that line to exit the canvas, our attention goes off the painting, and we lose our attention, but we lose the viewer. Now, one of the ways that we can break that is just cut those exiting vectors. How's Kautsky done it? Well, have a look at number 4. He's done it with a tree. Now the river still passes behind the tree, which now creates some tension, some mystery, some intrigue, but we don't lose the viewer's flow and that energy off the right-hand side. It's been broken now by the introduction of that tree, and I think it makes a much more successful composition. Similarly, have a look at this one. Beautiful old weathered tree kind of bending over. I've seen so many trees on farms in the South Island here in New Zealand that look just like this. They get battered by that weather. They lean right over. And this creates a really interesting compositional element. Again, that barn pretty close to center. It looks like he's left it there for example number 6, but here in number 5, we've got all this void space again. How do we create more of a flow and create something cyclic within the scene? Well, you got to stop it by putting something over there on the right-hand side, so you're balancing left and right. There's a way to do it, though, where it doesn't form those equidistant goalposts. Again, going back to number 1 up here, there's a way to do it without doing this left and right. It's about creating asymmetrical balance. What does asymmetrical balance mean? All right, look, if we're, you know what symmetry means, right? So things are equal either side of a dividing line. Well, here on this image, notice how we've got balance. So whatever's on the right is balanced with whatever's on the left, but it's not symmetrical, it's asymmetrical, right? So each side is different. It's not a mirror of the two things, but there is a balance nonetheless. Okay, that's pretty cool. These are just exquisite little drawings. I don't know what it is about Kautsky, but his pencil work just makes me weep. And it's just the simplest little chattered lines. He has this technique with a pencil called the broad stroke or the broad side. And, number 1 is an example of how he'll lay down a patchwork of graphite. But have a look at number 2, how he creates organic shapes and even some of these structures here within the scene. And he could do that just so quickly. And I think that comes from his time as an architectural draftsman. Looking at these differences between 3 and 4 and devices to enter the composition. Look, everything's equidistant. 2 trees, a door right in the middle, a zigzaggy road, and a big cloud right in the dead center. How do you break that? How do you create flow and tension? Well, look at number 4. Just beautiful stuff. Again, Kautsky is a master of tones, and what I love about these little tiny compositional studies is that you can knock them out really quick, but it gives you a really clear snapshot of where are my dark darks, where are my light lights, where are my midtones, what's the composition doing, where are my vectors, what's going on here. You can tell instantly if this is going to be something that's going to work or if it's going to be a dud. Again, have a look at this example up here at the top as a way to create visual interest. Now, I've seen this so many places in the South Island, this equidistant row of trees. How do you have pattern and repetition without creating something boring? And I think that's what example 7 and 8 really highlights. And just some more examples of a little watercolor sketch from Kautsky. Beautiful stuff. Now here, you can see he's talking about forms in composition. Now, even though 1 and 2 up here are the L-shaped composition, notice how the void space is actually using something else to balance that out. So he's got seagulls up there. Dark against light, light against dark. Pretty cool. And here, just working out major dark masses, the major interest within the composition, and some void space. And then working out what's going on with curving, non-linear vectors within a scene. I'll show you a couple of quick examples here of values as well, just within this Kautsky book. How many different ways can you think of arranging values within a scene when we're doing compositional studies? I just think this example is so brilliant. You've got a highlight, your lightest light, your darkest dark, and a midtone. You got 3, that's it. And here's how he plans the composition. Light sky, midtone hill, dark foreground. Okay, let's mix it up. Light sky, dark hill in the background, midtone foreground. Dark sky. What on earth could possibly give you that type of scenario? He's going to show us. I just think this is so cool. These are a way to use value within a scene to create something completely unique and different. We always got to have value and light in our mind when it comes to planning a composition. Now check this out. Here's how he brings it to life. I love this. I get such a kick out of this. Check out that light sky, kind of mid-tone in the mountain beyond. And of course here in the foreground with that dark house. You can imagine that there's a cloud that's passed over by, shading out a portion of this scene. Very cool. Check out number 2, very moody, very dramatic. I've seen late afternoons that look just like that. Number 3 and 4, again, look at the sense of light, the contrast, the atmosphere. So cool. And every single one of these is different. Every single one is different. And this is such a great reminder of how value can play a crucial role within our composition. So it's well worth doing little studies like this. I'd recommend, take a screenshot of this. Here, look. Make some studies. Put that on your wall. Get inspired by that. That's just so cool. So dang cool. Okay. Next. More things from Ted Kautsky's book. Just wanted to share that with you. We'll move on quick. Now, here's an example of Kautsky going through the process. And when I saw this gave rise immediately to my sketchbook method for planning a composition. And again, we're going to get into a way to create a visually harmonious composition here in a second. But with this, what I really love about this is the approach that he takes and the consideration he takes into mapping this out to lead the viewer to the intended focal point. Not enough of us do this. We take such a haphazard approach to planning our painting. Whatever we see in the reference material, that's the way our painting's going to be. But look here. He stated very clearly, my subject is this sailboat on the river. I'm going to point the viewer here. He's very definite about that. So the flow and the composition has got to end up in this place. How are we going to do that? Well, then he talks about the devices, 1, 2, 3, and how it flows through that major focal point. He's done a little bit of an object study here, getting his thoughts straight, and then bam, he executes. And he's got a really beautiful little loose sketch of what his composition is going to look like. Now, once he's arrived at that point, he produces a more detailed sketch. Is he on the right track? Well, hey man, I think this is epic. This is awesome. Love it. Love that little launch right there next to the little boat shed. So cool. A couple little boats. Sailboat there. I've got a model that looks just like it. You probably see it behind me. There you go. That's going to end up in a painting. A drawing before long. And then finally that led to a watercolor. Just a beautiful, simple little watercolor. Absolutely love it. So this shows that there's intent behind everything that Kautsky's doing. It doesn't just happen. You plan it. That's how these things come about. And some more examples from Kautsky's book. Amazing. So get on Amazon, do a search on this, find a book by Ted Kautsky or Theodore Kautsky. Well worth it. I just love these little seascape studies. Fantastic. And then finally, I love these tiny little studies. Light puddle, dark puddle. It's so simple. It's so simple. Nature and life, it's going to do things that are just going to make your jaw drop if you just have the eyes to see it. Here, he's using a puddle as a compositional device to introduce a light value into his painting and to balance it out with that lighter sky. Check this out. Now he's got a dark puddle to break up the monotony of that road and provide a device to reflect his subject matter in, anchoring the composition over on the right-hand side, but giving the viewer access at the same time through this road up into the countryside. Absolutely love it. Exquisite. Now, let me share with you some seascape paintings that are on my radar and things that I think about, because we're going to get into designing some seascapes here. I'm even going to give myself a little bit of a self-critique here with some seascape studies that I've done recently. Let me talk to you about some of my favorite seascape painters, starting with Frederick Judd Waugh. Now here, I love the energy and just the dynamic energy here in this little composition. It's a tight composition in terms of the elements are really on top of each other. It's really bunched together, but there's a flow in a very nice dynamic way, in a diagonal way from one piece to the next, where we leap off from this foreground into that surf that is passing between these two rocks. And then we've got that jagged rock meeting that wave abruptly. There's some void space over there on the left where we could see the waves curling in, and then a nice, beautiful sky. I love this. This is just such a simple, elegant painting, but it's got a lot of energy. Another one here from Waugh. Again, the name is Frederick Judd Waugh. I love just the simple energy here. These beautiful, really underworked, but in a good way, Loose, sketchy, painterly, lovely. It leads your eye in. It's just effortless. Leads your eye into where the energy is, right there where the sun is hitting that rock and this crashing wave behind. I love the use of light in this painting. Not everything has to be a crystal clear, beautiful bluebird sky day. Sometimes we can have a bit of energy in there, a bit of drama. And what I love here is that subtle gradient from the brilliant light, bright whites here against this dark rock. Again, light against dark, dark against light, and the way that gradient just softly sinks into a mid-tone as it approaches that horizon. Very elegant, beautiful. Here's an Edgar Payne seascape, and again, it's very similar in a way to Waugh in the way he creates this tight composition with one element and the next, creating areas within the painting that fit together so tightly, like a tight-knit jigsaw puzzle. I really like that. And here's another one, just focused on the energy of a wave. Sometimes it could just be a simple painting. And this is something that's going to inspire me to just focus more on simple little elements within the composition. You don't always have to make a big, grand statement. Sometimes something simple can really work well. But I love this Edgar Payne as well. As a study, this really inspires me with his, check out the looseness in that brushwork. Come on. He's not fiddling around. There ain't no 000 nothing in this. It's a flat or a filbert. It was probably 1 inch. Bam, he just got it done. And it's got that energy. It's got that power. Even though you haven't seen me paint like this, I really appreciate this kind of painting. What do I love about it in terms of composition? Again, simplicity, elegant. There's nothing really central here. I mean, maybe, yeah, that curling wave, but there's no element that really occurs smack bang in the center. Everything appears to be slightly off center, starting with that horizon line, nice and high in that composition. Again, high horizon line here in this Edgar Payne painting. And I quite like this. I like this S-curved flow that goes around these rocks towards that wave and then brings us back again. Really beautiful. Coming at it from a different point of view here, this is William Trost Richards. Now Richards here has one of my favorite seascape painters, and this I think is quite a little painting. We can make out pretty clearly either that's the dot matrix pattern of the printing, an artifact of the printing, which I'm going to say it is. It's not canvas texture. I think this is from a print. But anyway, nonetheless, what do I love about this painting? I love the epic openness and the depth here. I love how things are got out of the way here in the foreground. We could just sink into that background, into the drama of that atmosphere. The heavy rocks over here seem to be somewhat balanced by these beautiful little delicate sailboats out here on the horizon. Really beautiful painting. This one's got some drama and some power to it, doesn't it? I really love this as well. Again, this is a Richards painting. I love this selective use of spotlighting up here in the top and the cliffs. This is really something I find quite inspiring, and I might add it to one of my paintings. I'm always looking at the old masters for ideas on atmosphere and lighting, not just brushwork, not just like the handling of the paint, but what are some of the ideas that give this story that he's painting for us color? And one of these things is that selective use of light and the way it's illuminating what appears to be a castle on top of this precipice. Beautiful work. Here's just such a gorgeous painting of some rocks. And just, even though it's just simple, it's just a study of rocks, the texture that you can feel in there, and the composition here as well. Think about this in terms of light against dark, dark against light, contrast, sharpness, edges. Think about the way this really has got a completely different feel in the immediate foreground, and how it's got this beautiful, masterfully handled stepping down effect as it goes into the background. Even right down to the light seagulls against the dark cloud and the dark seagulls against the light cloud. It might seem so simple, but this just gets me. I love it. And finally, another Trost Richards painting. Just love this. Again, beautiful example of that use of color, but I like the composition and the way it appears to be balanced. We've got something heavy and dark right in the foreground, off center slightly, balancing out something there in the midground with that light rock. It's almost like a yin-yang symbol in a way. Light against dark, dark against light. It's kind of cool. I like it. Okay, now that I've shared with you some compositional stuff that's on my radar and some artists from the past, let's dive right in now into some color studies that I've done recently, and let's give myself a bit of a, well, I say let us. I'm gonna critique myself, and we're gonna hop to it. I hope I'm not too harsh. Gee whiz. Before I show you my color studies, I want to talk to you about the idea. I got this idea from my painting, right? It's basically a rocky, thrashing seascape. I want to paint a seascape with some of that energy that Frederick Judd Waugh had, but a little bit more of the openness within the scene, like a William Trost Richards. So there's going to be a mix of things going on. And I know that I'm going to be using a mix of different places around the world, combining some of my references. So right here, we've got a scene called Cathedral Cove. And I never want to shy away from doing something with dynamic energy like what we're seeing here. You know, even though it's a gray day, there's some really beautiful things going on. And so what I'm looking for when I'm looking at my reference material is okay, subject matter, energy, form, masses, light against dark, dark against light, accessing the composition, how does it flow generally? And so I'm starting to formulate an idea about my subject, and I'm trying to work out, what is this painting of? That's where I start. What do I really want to paint? And sometimes it can just be like, I want to paint that cool wave, and that's it. So I'll show you, basically give you an overview of the type of reference file that I'm dealing with for this particular idea. Then we'll jump into the little oil painting. Again, we're going to be bouncing around here, but this is Cathedral Cove on a sunny day. What I really love here are just little moments within the painting. Look at that bottle green water, just a little bit. Could I put a bit of that in there? I really love the shape of these rocks. I love that water spilling over. Fantastic. Really nice. And again, you'll start to get an idea of how a reference file looks for me. There's so much in here. In fact, I've cut this down considerably from what I would have in here. Now, this is really the thing that sparked this idea. So I took this chopper flight. I'm going to share more of that with you in an upcoming video, okay? But here, we're flying over these rocky stacks along the coast, and this photograph is not going to win me any awards. I get that, but get a load of the shapes that we're seeing here on this coastline. What I want to know is, what does this look like from standing on top of this rock right here? What's this scene look like from standing right there looking out across that ocean? Isn't that something else? Come on, look at this. How cool is that? What would this scene look like if I was standing right there on the edge, just getting pummeled by those waves, right there on this rocky shelf? If I was standing right there on that, looking out across this, what would that look like? And that gave me the idea. So, beautiful textures, beautiful form, kind of like the light. So I was thinking, I'll keep the light. I like the shape, the form, everything. The only thing I really want to change about this is the perspective, and then bring all those elements together with the energy of the ocean. So I think that's it for that file. Yeah, that's it for that one. Okay, so let's have a chat about the painting itself. Now we're missing the whole bit about how I actually constructed this as a piece. We'll get into that. And in fact, I don't think you're going to have to wait very long. There's a video coming your way, I think this week. Yeah, it's going to be this week. It's color studies. So stay tuned. If it's not out tomorrow, it'll be out the very next day. So this will give you a bit of a time lapse of how these came together with my references cut in there throughout the time lapse, so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm thinking about as I put these tiny little paintings together. This was a lot of fun. Let's play the game here, right? Of what's working, what's not working, and what if. And then we'll bring in the crux of what I think makes a great composition. Okay, now if you've been watching my critique videos, you'll know that I like to ask those three questions. And what I do is I basically run my composition through a series of filters. This is a questioning process. So we start off at the beginning with our thumbnail sketches in the sketchbook. Then we work up into a small color study. Then that ends up being the idea that we take to our bigger canvas, unless we have to go back to the drawing board. What I am doing now more and more is I'm adding an extra step of digitizing my color study, pouring into that, creating something even more epic. Stay tuned here. It's in this video, a time lapse of how I took one of these studies and just pushed it so much further. But what we're doing essentially is running it through a series of filters, almost like somebody panning for gold would run gravel through a classifier. You know what I'm talking about? Anybody pan for gold, you know what I'm saying, right? You basically shake out to see what falls out. You refine this material until you end up with the gold, okay? So what are those three questions? What's working? Number one, okay? You remember this. What's not working? Number two. And then what if? Number three. Now, start off nice and positive. Don't beat up the Tish, okay? Don't beat up anybody who refers to themselves in the third person. They're already fragile enough, obviously, okay? So just Okay, what's working here? What do we like about this? Well, what I really like about this painting is nothing. No, okay. No, I love the, I really do like the wave coming in, and I like this balance of energy with that wave coming in, smashing against these foreground rocks. The way we're lifted up. Let me get some arrows in here, in green. I'm not even plugged in. Plug yourself in, man. Come on. You're a professional. Act like it. Here we go. All right. So up here on my little thing, there we go. All right, now you're in business. Now, are we? Yes, we are. Good. What I like is the direction that this wave is coming in. Coming in hot, crashing against these rocks. We're lifted up with this vertical rock into these slopes here, and our attention is kicked back this way. We come down through this and then back again. I kind of like this from a cyclic point of view. It's got some energy. It's got some real flow. I like the difference between what's happening here in the foreground with some of these darker tones and these dark masses here. The way we get this stepped down effect as we go into the distance. It's got a great depth from here and to the back. I'm allowed to talk about my work this way, okay? This is the point of the first question of asking yourself what's working. You get to do this. Okay? Too many of us artists are feeling really bad about ourselves, beating ourselves up. And look, we've just got to take a win when we can take a win. All right? Do you mind if I do that with myself here? I give myself plenty enough of a hard time. So thanks very much. I like that. I think that's working. Generally, I think the palette's working. I'm happy with the color arrangement overall. Might need a few things addressed, but pretty much not bad. Okay, now, what's not working? Here we go. One of the things that I'm having trouble with is a bit of this repetitious sameness. I do this all the time. Now, geology does this, but I would want to mix it up a little bit and play with the angles and change that up. I won't get into what if or what I'm going to do just yet, but that's one of the issues that I'm having. I was struggling with this wave for some time. It appears to be just a little bit blocky, and I don't like how these lines flow right off. I want to break them before those vectors exit the edge. What will that do? Well, it'll help me create more of a flow within this composition. This is kind of a flow killer over here on this side, over there on the right. So I'd want to work on that. I want to do more with the energy. I want, this it just feels a little bit weak. If it was to make a sound, it would be the sound of air being let out of a balloon. It's just, it's horrible. Come on, I want something with more energy, more power. So I might want to work on that smash right there. But I think what's happening now is I'm getting confused because there's just too many things going on. Where's our focus? I think one of the things that doesn't work, what's not working, is that there's too much subject matter, too much stuff vying for my attention. Could I take a leaf from Judd Waugh's book and just simplify it maybe? Maybe it doesn't have to be simple, but that's something else that maybe is not working. Or is there a way that I can bring this together so it's a little bit more cohesive? I constantly strive for that, but you'll notice with my paintings, I tend to put more and more and more stuff in. Okay. So let's play the what if game. All right. Now, what if I start it again because it's crap? No, oh, come on, take it easy on yourself. All right, chill out. All right. What if I went in here and started to shift things and play with things according to a principle? A mathematical formula? Could I give this some sense of visual harmony, addressing some of the distracting things that we talked about, like the vectors, but could I come up with a way to create the flow within this painting all around something that's a universal compositional principle? What am I talking about? I'm talking about the golden ratio. Could I employ that here? Now, things are kind of asymmetrically somewhat balanced. Nothing's really dead center. But I haven't necessarily followed that ratio, maybe inadvertently here and there. I love it, but could I do that with this painting? Now let's get into that. Let's talk about that. And I want to introduce this subject with a little snippet from my podcast that I did recently with Anthony Avon. All right, take a look at this.
Looking at this image looks perfectly natural, almost like he sat there, painted the landscape, and just as it is, he did no further changes to it. But he did.
Absolutely.
Check this first example. I think my theory is that these artists, and this is not just about Bierstadt, a lot of other artists that I study do the same thing. I think they used no less than 2 golden spirals to compose an image.
Mm-hmm.
I have visual proof for that.
Let's
I still don't know.
Okay.
But here's the first composition. So first you'll notice.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah.
It's undeniable. Oh my goodness. Wow.
We
Okay.
have
So
the-
explain what we're seeing here, Anthony. Could you make that Bierstadt painting a little bit bigger on the screen? Could you drag
yes.
that out a little bit? And
Yes, I can full screen it.
Perfect. Let's zoom in on that sucker. And oh wow.
Yeah.
So
So first thing that you'll notice is the horizon line perfectly matches
Yes.
this golden spiral within a golden spiral.
That's
so
correct, yeah.
the basic golden ratio to separate the ground from the sky on this painting would be this line, actually, like this.
Right.
But he decided to put the horizon a little bit lower, but he didn't do it randomly.
No.
It aligns perfectly with the second division
Yes. Yeah.
of the lower section.
Right.
What else? Then in Bierstadt's paintings specifically, you can see that the golden spiral always kind of is supported by, for example, here with these rocks. These random
Right.
rocks on the ground kind of outline where this line is going. I can turn on the other set. This is an inverted set of the golden spiral.
Let's have a look. Oh, come
Still-
on.
Still, you have the,
So is he using 4? Is he using 4? I mean, look at the corner of that precipice. Look at the corner on the precipice right there. It just, and even the shape of the scoop taken out of the plateau on top of that cliff, it follows a golden section. It's right there.
But look at this figure, how it's perfectly placed here.
There you go.
I mean, maybe not. Maybe I'm stretching a little bit, but still, it's placed to align with this major separation.
Oh man, no, I don't know. If it lines up, it lines up. You know,
It lines up.
It lines up.
So this is the first thing that I'm looking for when I'm studying the image.
Bam, there it is. There it is. It's right there. Look at the trees. Look at the trees in the foreground lining up. The line of the mountains, the main structural line that those mountains hinge off. The line. I'm gonna shut up. This is epic, bro. Yeah, there it is.
It's right there.
It's right there.
This is one of my favorites. Back to the, here we have
It keeps
the
going.
horizon line, the focal points.
Yeah. So another Bierstadt painting. He's just put this is a beautiful, probably one of my favorite Bierstadt paintings of all time. This is a view. It's so fantastic. A view looking into this valley, epic light, epic mountains, the weather in the background, just unbelievable. Deer coming down into the water in the foreground, some fowl there in the foreground as well. And look at that, even down to the rocks and the water, the horizon, the waterfalls.
Look how that rock clearly starts sending the spiral in that direction.
Clearly
the opposite. I cannot prove this. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, certain things were measured to line up with the golden ratio measurement.
Yes.
Did they work with 4 or 1 or 2 or 3 golden spirals? How far did that go? Maybe it's an accident, because I'll tell you what, last year I did 70 days of master studies.
All right.
When I started just doing my own personal work, certain things just started aligning.
Wow.
I started to just intuitively placing certain elements, and then when I go into check my composition, things start to line up. It might be a coincidence, but still it's a coincidence based on the fact that this is the method that was used.
Epic.
So
Yeah.
keeping all these rules in mind,
Mm.
that's why this is so perfectly balanced. And this is one of the most beautiful paintings.
All right, a huge shout out to Anthony Avon. If you have not yet checked out the video version of that podcast, you're going to find it right here on Patreon. Just scroll through the main page through that feed and find that podcast with Anthony Avon. You can watch the video version of the entire podcast here on Patreon. One of those things that's exclusive just for you. How cool is that? All right, and so this really got me thinking, that conversation that I had with Anthony in regards to the golden ratio. Now, I've been using the golden ratio a bunch. Let me just give you a bit of an overview if you're feeling a little bit confused about what I'm talking about, because everybody's different. Everybody's on a different page there with their artistic walk. So let's just have a quick chat now, and we'll go over this and catch everybody up. Now, this is the way I had used the golden ratio previously. I would take any rectangle in any surface. It doesn't matter if it's even a square, long rectangle, very stout, kind of maybe an 8x10 or something that's like a 24 by 54 inch canvas. It doesn't matter. You could take any rectangle and you can apply the golden section to it. How do you do that? Okay, now there is a way to do this in Photoshop. I forgot, forgive me, but there is a way to do it. But here, for illustrative purposes, it's not going to matter. First of all, the golden ratio is a mathematical proportion, or it's also known as an irrational number, but it's a proportion that states 1 is to 1.618. And by the way, that's recurring. It keeps going, but it's 1 is to 1.618. Now, if you're a little bit confused by what the heck does that even mean, all it's saying is that there are two things, and one thing is bigger than that other thing by a proportion of 1 is to 1.618. So one thing's 1.618 times bigger than that. Why is that important? Why should we care? What kind of number is that? What kind of random number is that? Well, check this out. And there's so much cool stuff about the golden section. If you haven't heard of this before, there's so much mind-blowing stuff. I'm going to put a link in the description below to a video that I did a while ago. But this has been an art for millennia. The ancient Greeks were just having a wild time with this number, designing their temples and all sorts of stuff in regards to this mathematical proportion. And then it became very popular again with the Renaissance. In particular, check out the painting by Da Vinci, The Annunciation, where you'll see 1 is to 1.618 everywhere in that composition. But this is where it shows up mathematically. You might have heard of this. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. 8 and 13. I'm giving away the sequence, aren't I? Yeah. And that's a 34. It's 55. Oh, my math skills are stretched to their limit. Okay, and one more. Oh, can I just squeeze out one more there? Oh, I can't do it. I'm gonna have to pick up my phone. Oh, bless you, public school education. Come on, you playing the home game. Come on, what is it? I know it. I know what it is. 55 plus 89. 144. Thank you. Okay. One more. Okay. For those of you playing the home game, all right, and you're screaming at your screen right now, you know what this is. What I've just drawn here is the Fibonacci sequence. And it's a sequence that basically carries on just infinitely into the distance. You can keep going with this thing. But each number in that sequence is a sum of the previous two. Okay? 1 plus 1 equals 2. 1 plus 2 equals 3. 2 plus 3 equals 5. 5 plus 8 equals 13. 8 and 13 equals 21. 13 and 21 equals 34, so on and so forth. Why should you care? Well, check this out. If you take 144 and divide it by 233, you get 0.618, right? This sequence, which starts rather organically, ends up finding the golden ratio, and it gets closer and closer to it as it carries on. You don't have to go very many steps before you get near as dang it to within a decimal point or so of the golden ratio. Okay, so that's just one thing that's really cool. So it shows up everywhere in nature, and you're going to see that in my YouTube video if you want to watch that, link down below. But I'll just give you a quick overview. Seashells, trees, leaves, the bifurcation of trees. The Fibonacci numbers come about through, scales on a pineapple, for instance. It goes 5 one way, 8 the other way. It's everywhere. But we instinctively as human beings look for it in each other, right? It's everywhere in the human body. If you take your hand, one bone is bigger than the next bone by a proportion of 1 is to 1.618. If you take your hand, 1 is to 1.618. So from the tips of your fingers to your wrist, and then take the next measurement from your wrist to your elbow, the hand represents 1, from the wrist to the elbow represents 0.618 or 1.618. It's everywhere, man. And you look for it in people's faces. We just so happen to think that when we're looking at somebody that was like, wow, they're really attractive. Okay? Now, this is not a personality thing, but like, just take somebody that we've all find conventionally beautiful, right? It just so happens a proportion of their face generally tends to adhere to the golden section in terms of where facial features occur in relationship to other facial features. It's really cool stuff. So this is something that when artists from the Renaissance found out about it, they're like, oh, wow. And we've been putting it in art for, as I said, millennia. Now, how do we apply this? Okay, are you're convinced? Okay, great. Now, how do you apply it then, with all this said, to your painting? Okay, take your rectangle, any rectangle. Let's say this is 24 inches. Multiply that 24 inches by 0.618. Measure across with your tape measure, and you'll come up with a little point along there somewhere, and that will be your mark. Then measure again from the opposite side. Now, of course, I'm totally butchering this and doing it freehand, so this is not exact at all. But we'll come up from the bottom, 0.618, and then down from the top, 0.618. Now, this is how I've been using the golden section for years and years and years. I would place major focal points at the intersections of these lines that intersect. Now, I call these harmonic divisions. But what that chat with Anthony really did for me is it highlighted something, and I might have gotten something slightly out of place here. And what I'm going to start doing more and more is incorporating the spiral. Okay? Now, there's a thing here. So to find our spiral, what we do is we need to find the secondary harmonic divisions when we divide up these planes that we found even further. So we'll take these left and right, times it by 0.618, and we'd come up with a little line, probably somewhere around there. Okay. So again, somewhere around there. And then down here, so on and so forth. So what I'm doing is I'm taking, in this case, this dimension from right here, measuring from that point to that point, timesing it by 0.618, measuring across, and I'd come up with a line there. So you get what I'm doing here? And then you can divide it up further and further and further. So what ends up happening now is instead of 4 points, I've now got 16 points. But here's a really cool thing. This is where we can start to form that spiral that you were saying that Anthony had come up with. How does that spiral work? Okay. Now, because we're using Photoshop, one of the things that can make it a little bit easier, right, is to pull in a golden section spiral. Now, you can find these I found this one just online as a PNG. And I'm going to pull it in and literally paste it over the top of this rectangle. And you'll see we can actually stretch it to fit this. Edit, transform, distort. Here we go. I'm going to pull these corners into the vertices. And this is something that we can overlay over the top of any image. Now, if you don't have Photoshop, you don't have to do this digitally. You can do this all freehand. All right, probably better to start off doing that. And you can see how far off my drawing is there. We will make it fit. You will fit. Golden section, you will bend to my will. There we go. Okay, cool. So let's turn that off. Now here we can see that this is continually a, and we'll go to the next layer. Where this is 1 right here. This dimension right here, 1 is to 1.618, and it keeps getting smaller. 1 to 1.618, and it keeps going down and down and down. So here's how I'm applying it. Rather than having a major focal point occurring right there, I'm actually going to shift it now to where that spiral is going to terminate. And this is a bit of a subtle shift for me, but it's something I'm going to be playing with more and more and more. And let's just go ahead and apply this now to our little compositional seascape sketch and see what we can come up with. Let's go ahead and Command A, Command C, Command V. Let's get another spiral here. Image, adjustments, flip, edit, transform. Flip horizontal. Bam. Okay. And then, so what we're doing is basically taking that golden section, that golden spiral, flipping it vertical, flipping it horizontal, and I'm going to reproduce this 4 times to create this on the composition. And you'll see it might get a little bit crazy looking, but there's something going on here. Okay. All right. Now, I can see I'm kind of close. Not really, but kind of close with some of these things. But let's say I really wanted to use the golden section and just make the things in this composition adhere to this, because I'm convinced it's going to make a more visually pleasing scenario. What's something that I could do? Well, the first thing that I'd probably do is I'd go, okay, what's the subject about? What's the thing that I really love about this scene? It's got to be that wave. So I'm going to have that wave. And let's get a bit of a color here that we're going to be able to see. Will we be able to see that? A bit lighter. That'll be good. Let's have the crest of that wave really occupying space right here and almost curling around where that golden section is and breaking right there. And that could form the basis of the major horizontal right here. It can terminate on this side abruptly, where that rock will terminate along this major division, following that golden section. That rock could then finish right there where that golden section is, passing through the corner there and up through, just following off the way it is. Now, down in here, because I've chosen this golden spiral, I'm going to leave this one over here on the right alone, although I might go ahead and carve out that rock so it avoids it somewhat and carries on the scene like that. So essentially I've just kind of dropped things down in the composition just to fit this a little bit more. And then could some of these lines and these rocks follow that section? I believe so. Maybe even using the void space as a shape right there. That could work. Okay, how about this rocky stack in the background? I'm having too much fun with this. How about this rocky stack? How could we use the golden section with that? Well, what if the top of it, I like how, isn't it cool? It actually becomes pretty close. That's pretty cool. Okay. It's close. It's close. The edge of it here is already following pretty much there, and it just comes up and touches the top of that line. I really dig that. But, if I've got the major glow of a wave down here, do I want that directly above? Could that shift left or right. I don't think I want them stacked on top of each other. So I'm going to think about that. But for now, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the edge of that, bring it over there, and just drop it down, and maybe have the edge pick it up a little bit lower along there. There we go. And that will give me a bit of weight and shift it over. So I'm basically shifting it to the left just a touch. I think that'll work. And then finally, what about the distant hill? Well, I've already got this really cool line here. What about that line right there of golden section? Just a little bit of that. Have that be where it enters that rocky stack. Drop it down a little bit. Could even create an interesting shape there. And then this cliff face, I don't mind it so much, but I'm going to shift it out of the center a bit more and have it exit the canvas towards where that major harmonic division goes up here, exits the canvas to that point. So I'm just going to shift and adjust everything around that ratio. Now, when we get the spirals out of the way, could that make a difference to our composition? So this is an example of how I would apply this. And of course, I might shift and adjust some things, but I would apply things more or less this way to fit the golden section. And I'm convinced it can come up with something that's a little more visually pleasing. We're close. I'm pretty happy with the composition as it was, but I think it could just use a bit of adjustment. Now that I've done this, what I want to show you now is a bit of a time lapse of this stage with another painting and how I took that little oil sketch and then applied this ratio to it. And you're going to see where I actually lined up the rocks in the composition almost painstakingly to follow those spirals. And I'm convinced it made a better design. Anyway, as always, I'm really keen to hear what you think in those comments down below. Hit me up. Let me know. Andrew, you were just blowing this out of proportion. This is just way over the top. I think this is cool. I think it's cool. I've used the ratio for years. I think it's worked well for me in the past, but now this is a little twist on it. Again, shout out and props to Anthony for giving me the opportunity to explore this and the idea essentially. And by the way, Anthony's doing something really interesting. You would have heard about this from the podcast, but if you missed it, he's doing 100 days straight of master studies where he's literally drawing. He's a digital artist, so he's doing this all digitally, but he's taking the old master's paintings and he's working out what made him so great. And it turns out that, Anthony's discovered that many of them are using this golden ratio. He's putting the spiral over the top of the old masters, just going far out. As you just saw here, it lines up with Bierstadt, and it lines up with so many others. So go and follow him on Patreon. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to Anthony's Patreon in the link down below. And go and have a look at some of the stuff that he's doing there. Epic, epic art. Awesome. So let me share with you now a time lapse of this process, working now in Photoshop digitally. We're going to have some nice chilled out music, and then we'll come together again at the end. Man, super inspired. I hope you've enjoyed this so far. I hope you enjoy this time lapse. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me here in the studio. I've really enjoyed hanging out with you. I hope you got something out of this video and maybe a couple of tricks to apply to your next composition. When in doubt, use a golden ratio. I'm convinced it's a way that will help us improve our compositions almost immediately. And you saw here, not only from the little demo, but also that discussion with Anthony in regards to those Bierstadt paintings, just how abundant it is in the old master's work. And when you just plug it in, things just seem to click into place. Now, with the final design that I'm going to be transferring to the canvas of my seascape painting, it does seem a little bit over the top. I'll grant you that. I was a little bit hesitant about it, and that's when I uploaded it to the Tisch Zone. People were like, you seem to really like it, and I appreciate that. It is a little bit over the top, I know, but you know what? With this painting, I'm just going to go there and see how it turns out. So this was really cool, just using that digital process, putting that overlay on there, finding exactly where the golden ratio is, and then just lining up the design to that ratio, and it just seemed to visually work much better. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I'm going to be applying it to more paintings, and this time using the spiral. See, I've never really used the spiral before. I've just used those major divisions, the harmonic divisions, but those primary ones, never any of the secondary divisions. So I'm going to be doing that a bit more, especially where that spiral terminates. That's got to be a great place to put a focal point. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here. This has been super fun. I can't wait to spend some more time with you in the studio. We've got so much more to talk about. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a patron on Patreon. I could not do this without your support, and I just really, really appreciate you. Now, if you're not already, you would have heard me talk about this a couple of times already in the intro and here just in the outro of this video about the Tisch Zone. You might be new here going, what's the Tisch Zone? What's that all about? Well, the Tisch Zone is the private Facebook group that's associated with this Patreon page that is just for you as a patron here on Patreon. Go get in that group and start mingling, start chatting to the other people that are here on Patreon. It's a great community over there and a fantastic vibe, but there's two things that you got to do to get into that group, okay? Here they are. Number one, you've got to give me your Patreon name or your email, and you have to make sure that that is spelled correctly, okay? That's number one. Number two, you've got to click that you agree to the group rules. Now, if you can do those two things, you're in. If you don't do either one of those two things, I immediately hit decline. Now, here's why. That might sound really harsh to you, and I'm sorry, but here's why. I'm the one that is verifying you to get into that group, okay? So do me a huge favor. Let me just highlight exactly what you put in that field. Just give me the email and the name, nothing else. Just highlight. I'm going to highlight that email that you give me. I'm going to highlight that name that you give me. I'm going to plug it into Patreon, do a little search, and if you come up on that search and you're a patron on Patreon, good to go. We'll see you in there. And then click that little box that says you agree to the group rules. If you don't, man, I got to decline you. You just got to try again. All right? There's a few people that have been like, hey, what's up? I thought I was going to get in that group. Sorry. It's actually kind of hard to go find you if you don't give me the right information. So again, it is what it is, but I appreciate you taking that time and that effort to just make things a bit easier for me. And it gives me more time to make these cool videos for you. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here, get back to painting or drawing or something. I got something to do, maybe do the dishes. Who knows? Maybe go and spend some time with my son. But I'm going to get out of here. I cannot wait to hang out with you again in the studio. Until then, happy painting. I'll see you soon.